What is up, my fellow cybersecurity practitioners? I was working on a blog post last night and I sort of just had this idea come up, and I'm going to make a series called Modern Security Baby Steps. And what it's going to be is things that you can take to get a quick security win and a large security win at a low cost and low customer impact. All right, so these are things you can do if your customers in that Microsoft 365 ecosystem and you're looking to do relatively simple things to boost it. This particular video is a little bit longer than my average video, but we're going to walk through enabling mobile application management in a Microsoft 365 Business Premium tenant. We're going to walk through what MAM is, what MDM is, and how it works. As far as the series, I don't know how many videos it's going to be, but I'll make a playlist so that you can come check them all out. So let's get started on this first modern security baby step. All right, so before we dive into mobile application management, let's talk about what it is and how it works. And to really understand it, let's start with mobile device management. Mobile device management is sort of the OG way to manage mobile devices. It's been around forever. And essentially what we do is we use some method to enroll a device, right? The whole device. So it's a configuration profile or special application we install, and it's really evolved over time in the Google and iOS ecosystems. But I'm managing this, right? The whole entire device at the operating system level, managing what apps can be installed, how it can be configured, et cetera, et cetera. And it's a very powerful tool for managing corporate devices. I can make sure that they're used for corporate purposes, make sure that they're configured securely and appropriately and the best way to get the job done, right? So I manage the whole device. This whole piece of hardware is going to get managed in mobile device management. Mobile application management is the next iteration of that, and it's a little bit different. In mobile application management, I actually don't manage the device. I have a little bit of visibility into settings on the device, like is it encrypted and certain key stats, but I don't even see the whole phone number. And the purpose behind that really comes down to the BYOD sort of revolution, right? BYOD is super popular. Gone are the days when the company issues you a BlackBerry a lot of the time, right? And also a lot of the time, accessing data from your phone is a completely optional thing, right? I don't have to have Outlook and Teams on my phone, but I do because it helps me, right, for my personal preference. So looking at how we protect that data, right, on a user's device, my own device, it's got my family photos and my finances and all that jazz on it. It's also got work data on it, and it's important that we protect company data wherever it resides or is accessed from, right? At the same time, I don't want to manage that whole user's device. That user doesn't want me managing their whole device, able to wipe it and all that jazz, but I need to protect that data. Mobile application management works by managing at the application layer. So only the applications that access work data are managed and have policy applied to them, which protects that user's privacy while also protecting our data. So it's a very powerful thing, and the really cool thing is it's a small security win, right? Or actually it's a decent security win that we can take at a small cost with minimal impact to the way our users leverage their devices for work today. So it's a very powerful tool, pretty transparent, don't need to enroll the device. Let's go ahead and build it in my demo tenant, and we'll kind of talk through it as we go. So we're here in my standard demo tenant, and if we go back to the regular admin center here real quick, we're going to be working in two places today, Endpoint Manager and Azure Active Directory. So for both of these, you will need Microsoft 365 Business Premium is really going to get the job done in the best way, that or E3 or E5, depending on what you've got going on with the rest of the client. But that's going to cover all the licensing you need to get this done without having to build your own stack of licenses that tends to end up costing more anyways. So anyways, we're going to start here in Endpoint Manager, and we're going to go to Apps, and we're going to go to App Protection Policies. And it looks like I got some portal goofiness, so I'm going to go ahead and refresh just to get out of that. So I'm here in App Protection Policies. We've got a testing one here. This is a shared demo tenant, but we're going to create a new one. Now you'll notice I'm not in devices. Okay, I'm not creating device policies, and that's an important part of this. So we're creating app protection policies, all right? And we're going to start with iOS here. We're going to need to create two policies. So I'm going to call this iOS Mobile Application Management. You're going to hear me call it MAM a couple times. I'm a big fan of acronyms. And we're going to call this Unmanaged App Security. Unmanaged is important, and you'll see why in a second. All right, applications. So for this, I'm not going to target all device types. I'm really looking to protect unmanaged devices in my environment. So by picking unmanaged for any managed sort of corporate devices I might have, I'm not going to need to worry about those. Once I've got that set, I'll come down to target policy 2, and in this case, I'm going to pick all Microsoft apps or core Microsoft apps. I use all Microsoft apps. It makes things easy. It's going to protect pretty much all the apps, or really all the apps that you use to access the Microsoft 365 environment. As you expand on this and you have third-party apps that are maybe integrated through Azure AD, there's a lot covered here. There'll be a link down below to the blog post associated with this if you're not already reading it that talks through that logic. So let's go ahead and walk through some of these settings here. So the first thing we're going to do is come to data protection. And this really, I try to explain it to people as this part of the policy dictates how data is stored and managed on the device, okay? So we don't want our corporate data being backed up to that person's iCloud account, right? So that one's a pretty easy no-brainer. Send org data to other apps. We're going to set this to policy managed apps, and this is going to prevent me from sending an email attachment to my personal Dropbox or something to that effect, right? It keeps that corporate data in the corporate ecosystem. Now, in this particular policy configuration, it does require that you're using Microsoft storage, so keep that in mind. You can exempt applications if you want to, so you have this sort of list of exempt apps here, and it's just by application name. Check out the documentation if you want to do that, but basically think of this as managing some third party that isn't application managed. You can actually add them here and allow sharing to occur to that application. So if we keep going down, we really don't want them to save copies of org data onto their device either. Now it's outside of my sort of umbrella of protection, right? So we're going to go ahead and come down here. We're going to allow users to save copies. We probably have them using OneDrive and SharePoint, right? That's if they're in the Microsoft 365 ecosystem, good chance they're there. Box is supported here. Again, if you're using another third party, you need to create a policy that includes third-party applications. And again, in the blog post, there's links to documentation on that. So if we keep coming, I'm not worried about telecommunication data in most settings. I'm not necessarily worried about receiving data. This is definitely something you might want to think about for your own environment, because receiving data can obviously cause some security concerns as far as being able to inject data into that sterile environment, right? And as we keep going here, because we're not blocking receive data, we can put this into policy managed apps, by the way. That is the inverse of this setting, right? So it'll only receive apps or data from apps within the same ecosystem, right? But I'm not going to worry about this one. Restrict cut, copy, transfer, or cut, copy, paste. So cut, copy, paste is exactly what it sounds like, right? Can I copy text out of Outlook and drop it onto Facebook? Policy managed apps with paste in is my go-to. If I do copy some data from Outlook and try to post it to Facebook, it's literally going to post like, you can't do that, right? It's kind of cool. Third-party keyboards, I tend not to worry about. However, there's obviously a chance for abuse there. On iOS, they're very easy to block if you wanted to, but if that user's using one, it could cause an issue, right? So it really depends on your needs, and obviously you'll want to be monitoring Cyber News to see if there's any sketchy third-party keyboards floating around out there in the App Store. Encryption, I'm going to tell you to encrypt, right? We want to encrypt that data. Sync policy, manage data with native apps. So native apps in this scenario means contacts is the best example of that, okay? If I have contacts in Outlook, do I want to be able to manage them from my phone? I almost always allow this except for certain scenarios, and that means that when I install Outlook and configure it, it's going to sync my contacts to iOS, right? But it's not going to suddenly sync everything everywhere, but it's just going to let certain tidbits of data out. Like contacts, that way when I receive a call, I see the correct contact. I always block printing org data from a mobile device because now we're printing who knows what to who knows where. Restrict web content transfer with other apps. So we can pretty much say if you want to open a link from Outlook, you need to be in Managed Edge, right? This policy will manage Edge in addition to Outlook and things like that. So again, this one can cause, this is where we start to get into a little bit more end user impact. Not many people I know have Edge on their iPhone. If it's a policy you need because there's a lot of internal links that get emailed or things like that, then you'll need to train users through that. I typically don't do that. on my base level sort of baby step program. And then org data notifications. I love block org data. Now, you need to be careful with this one because blocked means I don't know I got a new Teams message. Block org data means I know I got a new Teams message, but I can't see the content of that message until I unlock the application, which is very cool. So that's pretty much it for data protection in iOS. We're going to go next, and we're going to go into access requirements. Now, access requirements is exactly what it sounds like. So we've set conditions for how the data needs to be stored and managed. Now we're going to set conditions for how the data needs to be accessed, right? So we probably want to require a PIN for access. And the cool thing is it can actually require a PIN at the app level. So if the user is one of the few people that doesn't have a PIN on their phone nowadays, I can actually, at the app level, require a PIN without impacting that user's overall device requirements, right? So that's a pretty neat feature. PIN type numeric is fine for me. I do block simple pins because if you look at the documentation here, simple pin is 1111, and that's just like having your password be password. Keep going here. I like a 6-digit minimum pin. It's just my thing. Certainly, I wouldn't torture users with 16 unless I really needed to for some reason. But 6 is kind of my favorite sort of starting point, at least. I'm not a fan of 4, is what I'm getting at. So Touch ID instead of PIN for access. That means, can I use my Touch ID, right, to access my device, or my application instead of my PIN? Sure, right? Touch ID is a perfectly trustworthy source. There are scenarios where you're not going to do this, specifically in certain compliances, but by and large, let's go ahead and let them use their fingerprint, right? Override biometrics with PIN after timeout. So that's basically saying, after a certain amount of time, do I have to fall back to my PIN? So it's certainly something you could do. You could say you can use your fingerprint. That's going to unlock you for 30 minutes, as it says here, and then you need to use your PIN again. I typically don't do that, right? We're sort of creating hurdles that we might not necessarily need. Again, your needs may vary. Moving on down, we have Face ID. I'm going to go ahead and allow Face ID. You don't have to. PIN reset after a number of days. I don't really do that anymore. You can, and that's basically just like password rotation policy, right? Change your PIN X number of times, or every X number of days. Again, it's an option. I would say see the latest logic around forced secret and password changes, and I'm not a fan of it anymore, right? So long as they've got that strong, non-simple 6-digit PIN, I'm going to be happy. And I'm obviously going to teach users about the importance of changing these things should something happen. All right, we're going to fly through the rest of these because I don't want this video to be too long. Work or school account credentials required for access. They really need to work on the name of this particular policy component because it drives me crazy. Setting this to not required doesn't mean you don't have to sign in to access your email. Setting this to required means I've got to authenticate using the full set of credentials like all the time, which is cool and all, but man, it's a terrible experience on mobile. So obviously I need to authenticate to actually configure my account, set on my email. I need to complete whatever 2-factor I have, and I'm still going to be rotated out whenever those expire depending on your conditional access policies, but it's not going to make me sign into the whole account every time I open the app. We've accomplished some protection around that with the PIN or the Face ID and those kind of things we set a moment ago. And then recheck the access requirement. Leave this be. It's going to check every 30 minutes to see if anything's changed any faster and you start to do some battery drain, any slower, and you end up with potential gaps when you need to make a change to this policy. So we're going to keep going here. We're going to hit next. Conditional launch. Again, this is one of those you can leave default, but I'm going to talk you through it very quickly. Maximum PIN attempts is 5. Reset PIN. After 5 attempts at my PIN to get into Outlook or Teams or what have you, it's going to say, all right, you clearly don't know your PIN. Let's try to authenticate you to your whole account, right? That's, username, password, MFA, FIDO, whatever you've got set up. Offline grace period. So after 720 minutes, it's going to block access. And what that means is if my device can't check in with Endpoint Manager for 720 minutes, it's not going to let me in. Right? It's not going to let me into Teams or Outlook or SharePoint or any of that because it hasn't been able to re-authenticate and assert that I have rights to do that. So this prevents a scenario where maybe I get terminated, I very quickly take my phone offline and start doing some data exfiltration type sneaky stuff, right? So it's good there. The only exception is if you've got a client that takes real long international flights all the time, you may need to bump it up to his or her longest flight so that you can allow them to use their phone offline for that long, right? And then finally, the next offline grace period is after 90 days. If I don't see you for 90 days, what should I do, Mr. Endpoint Manager? And what we're saying here is wipe the data, right? If your phone is offline for 90 days, it is probably stolen from Starbucks or something to that effect. It's going to wipe just the work data, not the whole device, Outlook and Teams, and essentially going to self-destruct and cryptographically shred so that that data is just not there and not useful anymore. And then finally, device conditions. Never, ever, ever, ever allow jailbroken or rooted devices into your environment. You don't want it. You don't want to deal with that security risk. It's insecure by default. And I think, we don't need to be installing custom ROM on our devices if we're going to be using them for work. So let's just call that a cybersecurity imposed smart limitation, okay? So we'll come down here and hit next. Next, we're going to assign it. So you always want to have a pilot group. In my test tenant, I'm not sure we have a pilot group here, but I'm certainly not going to assign it to all users. So we will just, let's pick on Jake, and we'll assign it to his test group. But the reason for a pilot group is obviously before you roll out a user-impacting change, you want to make sure things work as anticipated. So put a couple of power users in there and try it out. All right, and next, and you've got all your different settings here. Make sure you review them. They're doing what you want. Hit create. We've just created a policy. I'm going to super quickly do the same thing for Android. So what did we call it? I think we called it MAM, Unmanaged Android. Okay. I'm going to do unmanaged devices, all Microsoft apps. Next. So again, we don't want to allow custom backups, policy managed apps, don't have any apps to exempt here today. And then we're going to block save copies, OneDrive, SharePoint. You'll notice this is the same thing, which is why I'm flying through it. There's some different terminology for Android stuff versus iOS stuff. But other than that, we're pretty much looking at the same exact thing here, right? So not going to worry about telecommunication data for this one. Receive data from other apps, same spiel as before. It really depends on your needs. We are going to restrict cut, copy, paste. Cool feature here is we can actually block screen capture and Google Assistant. Big fan of that. That means the screenshot workaround is no longer a friendly workaround. Approved keyboards. Man, there are so many keyboards. I use Gboard. Someone else uses Samsung, whatever. This, again, depending on your scenario, maybe something you want to tackle, but you've got to come in here and list all those keyboards. It does have, SwiftKey, Samsung, Gboard, a lot of the basics, but as soon as you get beyond that, man, it's a mess. Encrypt data, obviously, kind of coming through here. Sync policy apps, sync managed data with built-in apps. That's that contact sync I was talking about. We're going to block Fencing org data. And that's pretty much it. Oh, right, we blocked org data for notifications. So again, same policy, PIN for access, block simple, 6, allow fingerprints, not going to do that. Going to allow biometrics, PIN reset after number of days, no. Select number, that doesn't matter anymore. At PIN when device PIN is set. This is one of my favorite settings available in Android, not necessarily available in iOS without managing the device, is if the entire device is protected. Right? If I've got and I do, right? I have a device lock and encryption on my whole device. I don't have to enter my PIN to get into Outlook so long as I need to do some other dance to get into my device, right? So if for some reason I turn it off, then it's going to fall back to an Outlook PIN, which obviously I would never do, but I could. So keep that in mind. It prevents needing to double step into your email. Again, worker school account, we ran through that, not required. Check after 30 minutes. Same exact spiel here, defaults, no rooted devices. And we're going to pick on Jake again. Select. Bam. So we've built out 2 policies, one for Android, one for iOS. Super straightforward work, right? Now that these policies are built out, we need to transition our users to modern apps. That's Outlook for mail, Teams for Teams, SharePoint or OneDrive to access cloud files, because in the next step, we're going to enforce this, okay? We're going to actually enforce that, hey, you need to use a modern app with a protection policy to access data, and we do that in Azure Active Directory. So let's take a quick break, and we'll be right back to check it out. All right, I'm back. In recording this, I need to get a drink before we moved on to Azure AD. So we've built our policies in Endpoint Manager. Let's build our policies out in Azure Active Directory. So I'm in the Azure Active Directory Admin Center. In case you need it for a reference, you just come into your Admin Center, admin.microsoft.com, come down here to Azure Active Directory. And we are greeted with this. We still get to click Azure Active Directory twice. Dear Microsoft, help us out. Take that click out of there. So what we're going to do here is we're going to come to security, and then we're going to come to conditional access. Now, conditional access is where we can build a number of policies. You see we've got our MFA policy on this tenant. It's in report only. Don't worry. This is a test tenant for those of you that are going to notice that. And the users do have manual MFA enabled. In fact, my user has FIDO enabled. See my FIDO video. Anyways, so we'll come in here to new policy, and we will create a new policy. Super straightforward. And we're going to call this require MAM, or mobile application management, for BYOD, Office 365. I love descriptive names in conditional access policies. Please don't be that person that does, some weird abbreviation underscore something, like just name the policy what it does. So we're going to assign this again to our pilot group. Again, before you get to this step, please make sure that everyone is transitioned to the apps. Things are working great. Policies are working as anticipated. But then we'll assign it to select users and groups. I'm going to go ahead and not assign this one in the test tenant, but what you'll do is you'll go to select users and groups. And then you have some different options here. And why is this not cooperating with me today? There it goes. Sorry, weird click issues. Users and groups, and then you just come in here. You can pick individual users. Don't really recommend that, but pick a group of users, MAM enforced users or whatever group you want to create. You can also exclude. This comes back to the break glass conversation we've had time and time again. Exclude your break glass account, please. So we're going to not select anyone just for testing, but obviously make sure you select a group. Then we'll come to Cloud Apps or Actions, and we're going to apply this policy to Cloud Apps, okay? And then we're going to come to Select Apps. So we would use like all Cloud Apps for an MFA policy, but in this case, we're going to use Select Apps, and we're going to use Office 365, and that covers Teams, OneDrive, SharePoint, Exchange, all that jazz in one fell swoop. That's all we need there. We'll come to Conditions, and we're actually going to filter this down to Android and iOS. That way we can build different policies for Windows a little more easier. I like precision in my policies. My face might be in the way. Whoops. But there is a done button down here. And then that's it. We don't need to do anything here. And we are going to, under access controls, we're going to grant, all right, under the condition that app protection policy is in place, right? That's it. All we're saying is an app protection policy needs to be there. It's obviously on you to make sure the app protection policy does what you want it to do. At the same exact time, it's going to require that you need a modern application, right? Or an approved client app, as it were. So if I click here, I'm not going to go through this whole document with you, but the link's right there. You can see all the different apps that are supported for application management, all right? So we will select that. Now, it does have some requirements here. It is going to start checking if those apps are configured properly, even if I have it in report only. So if I'm just building this to turn on later and I don't need any data, set that to off. That warning goes away. If I'm ready to test it and gather some data, we need to proceed with the selected configuration and understand that users are going to get prompted about this. It's not going to force them to do anything, but it's going to say, hey, we need to be able to see if you have app configuration policies or app security policies, excuse me. Now, they've already seen that if they're in the app security policy group, right? Because we've started to configure that. So it's really no big deal. So we're going to go ahead and proceed. Just be careful. Make sure you hit proceed. Otherwise, it's going to take all the fluff out of your policy and make it not function, all right? And it's creating up here. There it is. And that's it. Policies in there. We are done. It's that easy to get this stuff stood up, everyone. It's just not all that hard. I know this was a bit of a longer-winded video, but this modern security baby step provides a huge security win with a few minutes of work just by protecting end user devices at the application layer. So that's what this series is going to be all about, guys. Please check it out. I will, again, make a playlist. I'm not sure how many episodes are going to be in this because I'm not sure how many baby steps I'm going to come up with, but I'll make a playlist that collects all these together. Please do all the algorithmy things, like, subscribe, share, all that jazz, and I hope to see you on the next Cybersecurity Baby Steps.